So thank you everyone for being here today. As Caroline and Rafi have outlined already, this is the second panel in our Mafiacracies project launch today. Um, this project covers a wide variety of geographic areas, if you haven't been able to tell, all under the thematic umbrella of how criminal groups work with or embed themselves with state actors. And today we are looking at Russia's collaboration with criminal elements, both organized crime groups as well as lone wolf actors. This panel will be for 1 hour, so this will end at 1 p.m. Standard or Eastern Time, and then we'll have 15 minutes after that as well for a Q&A at the end. So again, please hold your questions till the very end there. We can get right into it. Since 2022, the Russo-Ukrainian war has shown how war has changed from even a few years ago, not only technologically on the battlefield and how both sides have been able to do deep strikes into each other's critical infrastructure, but also tactically, and this is the main sort of crux of what we're looking at today, where across Europe, Russia has expanded the conflict into a wider hybrid war. The Kremlin has increasingly leaned on criminal proxies to carry out their hybrid war against Europe and the West. In many cases, highly trained intelligence operatives abroad are replaced by petty criminals and mobsters to actually do most of that dirty work. These proxies, sometimes unwittingly, do the Kremlin's bidding and are tasked with jobs ranging from surveillance to vandalism, arson, sometimes even assassinations, money laundering, long laundry list of various illicit tasks that they are tasked with. Um, the Russian crime conflict nexus threat often goes underreported, and Western governments have taken limited action to prepare for this threat. And so, to discuss this today, we have a nice panel of experts here. We have Dr. Elena Davlekanova, Julian Lanchez, and Dr. Elena Grossfeld. So, starting with Dr. Elena Davlekanova, Dr. Davlekanova is an associate senior fellow at the Sahayditchny Security Center based in Ukraine. In addition, she is also a program manager for the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. She received her PhD in management from the Sumy State University in Ukraine. Elena is an expert in democratic governance, security policy, strategic foresight as well, with a focus on domestic developments in Ukraine and Russia and their effects on global peace. She also studies historical, social, economic, and cultural narratives about Ukraine and Russia, their connection to the on the ground situations, and their influence on decision making practices and processes. Um, with the Sahayditchny Security Center, Elena has spearheaded work on the Everywhere War Tracker, which is an interactive database documenting military provocations, sabotage acts, cyber attacks, and other hybrid operations targeting European nations since 2022. It is based on open source intelligence and it tracks Russia's Everywhere War, which is, we'll talk about that more, but a dispersed campaign of some threshold warfare. Then we have Julian Lanchez. Julian is a junior research fellow at the Current and Emerging Threats Program at the International Center for Counterterrorism, the ICCT, based in the Netherlands, where he specializes in extremist and terrorist online activity, as well as the operational behavior of terrorist actors. Julian holds masters in terrorism, security, and society from King's College London, and a master's in crisis and security management from Leiden University as well. Last fall, Julian co authored a report titled Russia's Crime Terror Nexus: Criminality as a Tool of Hybrid Warfare in Europe. The report looks at over 100 confirmed instances of Russian hybrid operations across Europe and highlights important trends around recruitment, tactics, and locations of attacks. He's also co authored a follow up article to that piece, which came out just last month. And finally, we have Dr. Elena Grossfeld. Elena obtained her PhD from the Department of War Studies at King's College London, where she is a member of the King's Center for the Study of Intelligence. Elena holds a master's in intelligence and international security from King's, as well as a master's in linguistics from San Jose State, and a bachelor's in mathematics with a minor in Russian studies from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Her research interests are strategic culture of Russian Soviet intelligence, Cold War, and information warfare. And as Russian sabotage operations were spiking in 2024, she helped co-author a piece in Rusi titled Russian Sabotage in the Gig Economy Era. The paper analyzes Russian recruitment and financing strategies for their gray zone operations during this current war, as well as prior tactics used by Russian intelligence before the war. So thank you all so much for being here today. And just to start off the panel, I'm going to turn to you, Dr. Davlikanova. So we hear these terms, gray zone, hybrid warfare, everywhere war. I just threw them around a bunch in the intro. I was wondering if you could just briefly go over what that means when we say these things and how they factor into Russia's strategy, and to some degree, how kind of criminal elements also factor in to this strategy.
Yes, Robert, thank you very much for this question. And it is true that while the Western community is debating what kind of term would be the most important and appropriate, and what is the definition, Russia is very much excelling its capabilities in waging the sub-threshold warfare, the terms that I prefer. However, we can hear the hybrid warfare, gray zone, phase zero operations, shadow war. Foreign Policy Research Institute also introduced non-traditional warfare as a term, but it's Sagaidachen Security Center for the trackers that you have already mentioned. We use sub-threshold warfare, and also we call it a more kind of fancy term, everywhere war. So while these terms differ greatly, and there are, of course, shades of meaning in each of them, but overall, what they mean is sustained hostile activity conducted below the threshold of declared war, combining military and non-military instruments to achieve strategic objectives while avoiding decisive escalation and clear attribution. And the good thing is NATO finally made it clear that at certain point there could be Article 5 application in response to certain types of sub-threshold warfare operations. However, with the crisis in NATO, we don't know how that would play out. But overall, this sub-threshold warfare is conducted in all the domains. Land, maritime, air, cyberspace, and of course, cognitive domain. Moreover, this cognitive domain is the primary domain because everything starts from there. The recent most interesting example is the current operation conducted by Russia on the establishment of Narva People's Republic, where small clusters of social media channels are already amplifying separatist narratives. They are calling for actions. They explain that Russia will support those who act, and so on and so forth. And Estonia, for Estonia, this is not the first or separated incident. Since 2022, again, our tracker shows those incidents that could be tracked in open source. There were tons of airspace violations. There was sabotage of undersea cable by Pittsburgh vessel, and it's very unfortunate that Europe doesn't act decisively on that, and Ukrainian special services are more decisive while they actually put some of those vessels down. There were certain drones seen near the military bases and so on and so forth. Russians went even so far as organizing a board guard vessel violations when actually several Russians crossed the river and entered Estonia's territory. So what is going on is something that is called Gerasimov's hybrid war doctrine, but we are actually referring to Gerasimov's article of 2013, where he didn't use the word doctrine, neither he used the word hybrid nor warfare. I mean, he actually, but this article is actually extremely interesting because what he starts it with, he refers to Arab Spring as an example of the new type, as he said, new type of affair, and probably he also meant Orange Revolution as one of such examples, because he also mentions colored revolutions everywhere. So actually, what he is saying that this is the invention of the West, and that kind of Russia needs to learn it, understand it, and find the ways to deter it, which is extremely interesting. And recently, Belarus, by the way, also said that the West is conducting the hybrid warfare against it. What another very interesting thing, what he was saying, that Russia also had its own history, which dates back to the Russian Civil War, and then also during the Soviet times, some of this toolbox was used, or toolkit was used in Hungary and Czechoslovakia, and of course this special measures, the terms that is very very well known. I mean, Russians are very good in undermining those countries that it wants to later control, and we see how much pressure is currently on Europe. So, to cut the long story short, if you would like to see that these are no kind of separate incidents, that this is a very well coordinated, well planned a campaign against transatlantic alliance, especially against the European Union. You can check our tracker. It is an online map where you can see each and every incident on the map. We are also inviting organizations to cooperate with us to track that, because it's a unique instrument which shows that Europe is already at war with Russia. While Europe is questioning whether it is at war with Russia, Russia doesn't do that. I mean, Russia knows what it is doing, and I hope that we will be able to oppose its very damaging to all our, democratic and liberty-loving world. So we should actually do something and be way more assertive in that.
Thank you for that primer there. And I'm going to turn to you, Dr. Elena Grossfeld, the other second Elena today. Uh, so we've just gotten this primer, and of course, the way in which criminal elements are specifically used by Russian intelligence groups. That is also, a thing that we are trying to highlight here with this project. And I was just wondering if you could walk us through, especially prior to 2022, what that sort of relationship between various criminal elements, whether they be petty criminals, street criminals, organized crime, transnational organization groups, what those criminal elements have, how they've been interacting with Russian intelligence.
Sure. So the relationship is actually quite long, and it started before the Soviet collapse, and we can say even before the KGB time. But initially, for the KGB, it was fighting an organized crime, but it was also infiltrating the crime community, the criminal communities, in the same way that they infiltrated other social structures. So the criminal community, from small to big, were penetrated by KGB recruits, and they were using the prison system to facilitate and coordinate and to instrumentalize the criminal society in Russia. But it was pretty much kept under control. But what changed was with the Soviet collapse, the institutional discipline disintegrated and ideology is replaced by quest for personal enrichment. And the relationship then shifts from control to something more symbiotic. And this power triangle comes about with the political elite, the KGB or state security, and organized crime. And organized crime becomes necessary for the state's operation. Now, the KGB had networks and foreign contacts, and criminals had the muscle and the executive capacity. And together they moved billions in state assets out of the country. And that part was actually confirmed by the Russian Supreme Court 1992 investigation. So it was not corruption contaminating the intelligence services, it was more of an institutional logic. And so the 90s were completely wild. But we can see the signs of this relationship become operationalized abroad as well. So, for example, in Turkey in 2011, two Chechen suspects accused of bombing of Domodedovo airport were shot dead in Istanbul. The Turkish prosecutors said the FSB was involved, but then the BBC reporting identified at least one hitman as a member of Moscow criminal gang. And the same pattern was in 2015 in the killing of Chechen military in Turkey. And FSB was not just directing operations, it was outsourcing the trigger to organized crime. For example, in 2014, when Russia moved to annex Crimea, it was not just the little green man. It was also done through the criminal channels first. So Moscow-linked criminal networks, including Solntsevo, which is very big organized crime group, were already embedded in Crimea's economy through contraband and drug smuggling and through Russian banks. And so they served both as intelligence assets and as political factors before actually a single green man appeared. And by the time the 2022 full-scale invasion started, Russia had already prepositioned criminal infrastructure across Europe. If we take, for example, Spain, in Alicante province alone, and that province is handling about 30% of maritime cargo shipments to Russian port. There are rotating teams of Russian nationals from St. Petersburg organized crime groups that are used to provide security for dual-use goods shipments, and they handle cash, escort Russian state security and GRU personnel. And they include professional assassins, the killing of the defector pilot, Russian defector pilot who flew his helicopter to Ukraine and then was placed in Spain. He was assassinated in 2024, and several supposed suicides of various Russian executives in Spain all have the hallmarks of criminal assassinations and that are used for targeting killing. And in some cases, the assassins may not even be Russian. They can be outsourced to local groups. And after the 2022, when the mass expulsion of Russian intelligence officers from Western countries took place, the use of criminal proxies went from opportunistic to systemic because, you need to fill the void. And so now they deliberately recruit criminals for specific outsourced tasks in exchange for money or protection or both. So why does this persist? Criminal proxies provide deniability. They have reach in places that intelligence officers have harder time to operate, and they are completely expendable. And so this is not a bug in the system, this is a system. What became as infiltration and control in the Soviet period has evolved into something like a genuine state criminal symbiosis, a nexus of sorts, and it is likely to continue in that way.
So, Julian, you recently co-wrote a report that kind of gave kind of a larger macro view of these various attacks since 2022 across Europe. And I was just wondering, could you give us a sense of how this is playing out in Europe today in terms of the specifics? If we're talking, the numbers, how often is this happening? What's being targeted? Where is this targeting? What type of operations are we seeing? Things of that nature.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. I think to understand the trajectory of the recent Russian hybrid campaign, I think it's actually important to look a bit before the full-scale invasion in 2022. So I think we've heard already Russian hybrid activities are by no means new. They have been carried out before, but already high-profile events such as the attempted poisoning of Sergei Skripal, the murder in Berlin, have led to quite significant expulsion of Russian diplomats in Europe, which were in fact a lot covert intelligence operatives. And with the full-scale invasion, firm Ukrainian resistance, and also the very decisive European reaction, which Russia arguably hasn't anticipated, there was another wave of expulsion. So Russia was, at least to some extent, temporarily robbed of its intelligence operation capabilities in Europe, especially with regard to hybrid activities. But they adapted relatively quickly by outsourcing this to ordinary citizens that are recruited just for money. And this seemed to have worked quite well. So we see that following the full-scale invasion 2022, this hybrid campaign gains traction and throughout 2022, throughout 2023, and it's really spiking in 2024. Including our recent publication, we have counted around 150 incidents in Europe, so a further 30 in the last half year, plus some that we have newly identified, where evidence has just now emerged. So we see really in the first half of 2024 there's a peak, and now the incidents are slowly declining again. There are different possible explanations. One is that Russian intelligence shifting a bit their resources. Also, that there's now a greater law enforcement focus on this sabotage activities, but also simply that a lot of incidents are only becoming aware to the public after a certain time period. So it's likely that we are just missing a lot of incidents. And then maybe with regard to the type, we really see a broad range of different activities. So we have seen high-profile attacks that actually resembles terrorism. That's maybe why we, as International Center for Counterterrorism, also are looking at them. So we've seen the placing of parcel bombs at DHL cargo planes that could have very likely downed those planes if they hadn't, for a chance, explode on ground. We have seen the burning down of Poland's biggest shopping mall. We have seen planned attacks against cinemas in Prague, an arson attack against an IKEA store in Vilnius. So there are these high-profile incidents, but there's also a very low-profile set of incident types. So we have seen graffiti campaigns or the placing of stickers that are intended to sow rather pro-Russian sentiments or anti-Ukrainian incidents. So false flag, for instance, in Poland, Ukraine was several times in graffiti or in stickers portrayed as national socialists, so to basically amplify the Kremlin narrative to justify the invasion. We have seen the weaponization of illegal migration, so that Russia basically is channeling migrants to the Polish border, to the Baltics border, to the Finnish border. We have seen more recently acts of public disturbance. So, for instance, especially during the Olympics 24 in Paris, there was a massive campaign to undermine the games. We've seen, for instance, the placing of coffins wrapped in French and Ukrainian flags under the Eiffel Tower to protest against an alleged soon involvement of French military in Ukraine. So really there's a broad level of and broad type of incidents that cannot be simply classified as one tool, but we are attacked on very different fronts. And that also includes targets. I think you also asked for targets. We have seen more military strategic targets, so railway connections to Ukraine, a warehouse in London that stored military equipment for Ukraine, also manufacture of drones in Lithuania. But we have also seen attacks against civilian infrastructures that are not related at all to direct military advantage. Again, shopping malls in different European countries. We have seen assassinations. We already talked about assassination of Maxim Kuzinov, but we have also seen different assassination attempts. And then we have also seen this impact on the broader public. So again, this displacing of coffins. Or we have also seen the hijacking of demonstrations where a few paid actors basically posed in front of unrelated demonstrations. These pictures were amplified online. So we have seen a nexus between online and offline to create false image. So yeah, really a broad range and attacks on different fronts.
So another thing that I think is important for us to understand, and this will go both to Dr. Grossfeld, as well as back to you as well, Julian. When we kind of talk about this additional element, which is recruiting, right? As we've said, most of the on-the-ground agents are, or at least, high-level agents for the Russian intelligence are no longer operating out of embassies, but they still are able to recruit these people through online as well as through some alternative in-person means. And another element of that is, of course, payment. And not to steal your thunder too much, Julian, but it seems like one of the bigger trends highlighted in your report is money and people getting paid for these actions is far and away the biggest motivator, which pulls in you, Dr. Grossfeld, and your article that you wrote. It also talks a lot about this, element of crypto, not only to pay these people, but also sometimes it works the other way, where you have these larger organized crime groups actually money laundering back to Russia. And so I'm curious if you guys can talk about this recruiting element, and then, of course, the payment off the back of that recruiting element.
Sure, I can start with recruiting. So recruiting works on multiple levels. One that we particularly noted in our article was this gig economy approach, where they, FSB or GRU or anyone else, are running public Telegram channels, as an example, and they advertise for come work for us, quick money, easy job, and people approach them. Those are usually Russian language Telegram channels. They approach and they are being recruited. Initial assignments are, graffiti, as Julian posted, or, stickers, or other low-level activities that are not necessarily even look like you're working for a state actor. But then, it goes higher and the involvement becomes more complete, and then people are recruited to, arson and perform those completely illegal activities. So if before you could say, oh, it was graffiti, I'm not aware of it, at some point you are crossing the threshold. For the payment, the crypto has been a very convenient venue to send money. It has been also used as as you mentioned, a very convenient venue to launder money, because the Russian criminal hackers are cooperating with Russian state security, with FSB, with GRU, with SVR, and the proceeds that they're getting are funneled through those crypto exchanges that are, of course, not compliant, and they are outside of either European or American jurisdiction, and big amounts of money are passing there. And this enables transfer of large amounts of money. There was a recent investigation in UK, I believe, about the agents who facilitated those money laundering activities. And then also, let's not forget the case of Jan Marsalek of the famous Wirecard affinity, who is also have been used as a agent running other agents. So he was an intermediary for the Bulgarian people that were arrested in UK, and he was tasking them with different requirements. They were reporting to him, and apparently he's now working either for FSB or GRU or a combination. So the crypto exchanges have made everything that much more easy, because if during the Soviet times the KGB had to travel with, suitcases or create shell companies, not that now they don't create shell companies, but now it's done that much easier. Russian crypto exchanges have also been under the control of state security. For example, FSB took control of Garantex. In other cases, the crypto exchange owners were either forced into cooperation and in one case assassinated because they did not agree to the correct setup. And so this is a very productive way of running the business.
Yeah, I think Dr. Grossfeld actually covered a big chunk of our findings already. I think it's safe to say money is the primary factor that motivates people, not ideology. Notwithstanding to say that sometimes money and ideology go hand in hand. So it's not always just people who look for money. They look for money, but they are also very pro-Russian. Maybe so focusing a bit more on the recruitment process itself. Yes, online recruitment is really important, and it predominantly happens via Telegram. A few other encrypted platforms are occasionally used as well, Zengi, for instance, or Viber, but more as secondary options. But I think a relevant finding of our report was also that, at least for the kinetic activities, only about half of the cases were actually online recruitment. The other half were recruited in person. And there again, we see patterns that are quite familiar from terrorist recruitment. So we have often seen that relatives recruit relatives, or that friends recruit friends. So basically, a trusted peer facilitates engagement in illicit or subversive activities. It's easier to overcome initial concerns. We've also seen that in quite a few cases, the recruited relative wasn't, or at least claimed to not be aware of Russian intelligence, especially GRU, as the actual client, while the recruiting family member was aware. Same principle goes for France. There was one element of the offline recruitment. The other element of the offline recruitment was really criminal activities, organized crime. So there were a few cases where Russian intelligence handlers worked with organized crime, and the counterpart engaged in organized crime could actually leverage his or her, in this case I think always his, network to basically pass down tasks, the command chain, and the really foot soldiers, the low-level foot soldiers, were not aware anymore at all for whom they are doing dirty work and what they are doing. We've also seen recruitment in prison in several cases, sometimes in Europe, sometimes already in Russia, that first ties were basically established in Russia. That's speculation, it's beyond our knowledge, but we assume that some people were basically put a choice. You are criminally prosecuted in Russia, or you can go to Europe, and at one point you will receive a call, because we could see people were on wanted lists in Russia. Suddenly they disappeared from this wanted lists. They appeared in Europe. They carried out hybrid activities here. And then actually when they were caught, they reappeared on wanted lists. And actually Russia asked for these people to be returned, possibly as basically an act of caring for its own operatives. But yeah, so we really see this online and offline divide. Again, also when we quickly to speak about online, there's not this one online pattern. We have seen different directions. So we have seen people self-recruiting themselves, basically. So they reach out to Russian handlers based on an advertisement. but we have also seen that people got actively approached. And again, we have also seen overt and covert recruitment. So again, some advertisements were pretty clear. It was money for arson or money for other illicit activities, and it was published in a pro-Wagner group. So I think it is pretty obvious where we are going. But we have also seen, for instance, that Russian handlers have recruited in Ukrainian job searching groups. So basically posting, I'm open to work, and then they got a message with again some possible graffiti task or sticker task that doesn't seem overtly criminal, and maybe also not where you can tell immediately Russia as a label. So yeah, it's really diverse, and it's not just one online or offline. Recruitment can take different pathways.
All right, so going back to you, Elena Davlekanova, we've seen similar styles of all of this actually happening in Ukraine as well. Obviously, Ukraine, has a conventional war going on there from Russia, but you still see some of these, um, a lot of these sort of hybrid criminal uh, tactics being used in Ukraine, and they are perhaps not obviously, but they are certainly of a higher intensity and more aggressive than we are seeing in uh, the rest of Europe, perhaps unsurprisingly. Even when we are seeing, perhaps with the exception of the attempted assassination of the head of Rheinmetall, um, virtually all of the like very violent attacks that we're seeing across Europe are, for lack of a better term, kept within the family. It's usually Russian dissidents being attacked in Western Europe, not Western Europeans themselves. And obviously, we are seeing but we are seeing extremely violent attacks in Ukraine. We have, various bombings, suicide bombings, even wide variety of murders and such. And I was wondering, given, that's in your backyard essentially, can you speak to us more about that and kind of what an amplified version of these Russian attacks looks like?
Thank you for this question. First, to clarification, in my understanding, there is no hybrid aspect to what is going on when the big kinetic war has already started. So we have kinetic and non-kinetic um, aspects of the same big war of attrition and basically a genocidal war. And second, for me as a Ukrainian, as for all the Ukrainians in here, it is very hard to distinguish between the Russian proxies like criminal groups or whatever and Russian state, because to Ukrainians Russia is a mafia state. It is a terrorist state. Even back in 2022 when I was making a research, Russia qualified as a state sponsor of terrorism, and it is very unfortunate that it has never been acknowledged as such, and instead we see sanction lifting. However, it is true this the non-kinetic part continues. So apart from very severe cognitive warfare, constant cognitive operations against mobilization, against the president, who is kind of stands in the middle, stands in the path to peace, and so on and so forth. So Russia is doing everything to undermine Ukraine's resistance. However, there is also very specific incidents, for example, in the cyber domain. And you here can see very clearly how Russia escalates. For example, in 2023, there were about 2,500 cyber incidents. Next year, it was already almost 4,500, and in 2025, it was 5,500 incidents. So the increase is there. Russian state is working very closely with, for example, Cyber Army of Russia Reborn, No Name, and other groups that are attacking whatever they can attack. For example, in 2023, there was one of the biggest attacks against Kyiv's Star, it's our mobile operator. 24 million users were deterred from using mobile connection, which means that they couldn't use any of the applications, and Ukrainians are living in their phones. We had DIA, for example, so access to all the services, banking services, state services, they were all denied. It had impact on air raid warning and emergency communication and so on and so forth. There were multiple attacks on Ukrainian independent media. And also all kinds of all the ministries are suffering from DDoS attacks and so on and so forth. So I mean, there Russia is very active. On average, currently we have 15 attacks every day. When it comes to sabotage, I mean, the scale is enormous. Again, as Julian mentioned, they are trying to concentrate on critical infrastructure. They tried to find cheap executors, deniable chains, and strategic targets, of course. So they mobilize people through Telegram, or mainly through Telegram, but also they use other means. And one of very recent but targeted campaign was against recruitment centers. But if we look on in 2026, so basically this year, so at the beginning of the year, there was a very big and very tragic incident when a Ukrainian woman who didn't have a stable source of income was recruited by Russian curator, and she managed to make an explosive at home. Then another person, 18-year-old woman from Kharkiv, she was acting probably separately, also recruited separately. Well, the first woman placed an explosive, the second called the police came, explosives went on, one young police woman died, there were many other people wounded, and this was one of very successful operations. There were several killings of our representatives of intelligence services. But another very high-rank political killing was the killing of Andriy Parubiy. He was the hero of the Revolution of Dignity, a very important person for Ukraine's state development. And again, a man who killed him was recruited by Russian services. He was promised that in exchange, Russians will help find the body of his son who died at war, and his body was not yet returned. So these kind of operations are ongoing. Unfortunately, even after so many years of living at war, some Ukrainians are still vulnerable to this kind of persuasion. But this reminds us that this is an everywhere war, and we should all be vigilant.
So turning back to you, Dr. Grossfeld, obviously most of this is pretty much all of this is being facilitated by various Russian intelligence groups. That being said, obviously Russia does not have just one intelligence organization, they have multiple, and the different organizations don't always work in the exact same way. So I'm curious if you could kind of shed some light on the different Russian intelligence groups that we have seen kind of active in this hybrid war, in terms of how they've worked with criminal elements, and if they are more similar, more distinct from each other, and things of that nature.
Sure. So first of all, there are three main intelligence organizations in Russia: the GRU, the FSB, and the SVR. But those are not the only ones, because there's now a whole ecosystem of private companies that are facilitating and helping in that, not only in hybrid warfare as such, but also in disinformation, in cyber operations, and things like that. And let's not forget something that's called bulletproof hosting, which is also one of the ways that private companies assist criminal hackers to attack or volunteer criminal hackers to attack Ukraine and the West. But basically, if we go back to the three main ones, The GRU, which is the military intelligence, this is the most aggressive of the three main agencies. If you remember the Skripal assassination attempt of Sergei Skripal and his daughter in UK, the two people who got so fascinated by Salisbury Spire were GRU officers. They run a lot of operations, including in cyber. The unit 74455, it's the Sandworm or APT-44, is responsible for many destructive cyber attacks, including the NotPetya, which was like a global 10 billion in damages or something like that. And they also have Fancy Beer, which is linked to another GRU unit and others. They are using their specialty. They're buying off access from cyber criminals, and so their cyber attacks are very hard to distinguish from the criminal cyber attacks, and that's according to the Netherlands intelligence organizations that said that it's practically, indistinguishable in that sense. And of course, they also do the physical operations. They have good relations with the Spain network, and participated in attempted coup in Montenegro and the range of sabotage operations in Europe. The FSB is the domestic-facing agency, but its reach has increased significantly since its creation, because initially it was responsible for operations within Russia and the former Soviet republics. However, since the beginning of war in Ukraine, their mandate is now basically pretty global, and they have been operational in Europe, including in the Baltics that Dr. Dovlikanova mentioned, and in other places. They are running cyber groups as well, but they are also forming sort of like this criminal cover for the evil ransomware group and Evil Corp and others. They are running the majority, I believe, of the recruitment Telegram channels in Europe. And they also have an additional venue for launching these operations, because they have a bunch of criminal organizations created for smuggling from the Baltics, for example, with cigarettes. And so they already have existing relationships and, using them to full extent. And then the last one, the SVR, which is the foreign intelligence that is supposedly not operating within Russia, but of course you never know, because there's no real enforcement or supervision of intelligence agencies. And this is the successor of the KGB First Chief Directorate, is the more sophisticated and the longer duration of the organizations. For example, Marsalik was one of their cooperation projects. And they are running, if we look at the cyber side, they are running more long-term espionage collection operations. If we remember the SolarWinds case in the US, which was compromising a lot of government agencies. So they are all very effective. They all cooperate through different venues and different criminal groups. And that is not, it's really hard to figure out the exact relationships between them, because of course everything is covered and there is no organization within Russia that will create those supervision and enforcement mechanisms.
All right, so I think I'm actually going to skip a couple of questions here, because I'm just going to go to this last question that I'm going to pose to all of you. And this is the question of, what do we see as the potential threat of this hybrid war, especially in terms of the escalation, right? So obviously there is the issue of, the actual damage of the war, of the hybrid operations themselves. How damaging do we think those could be? And then, as Dr. Devlikanova mentioned at the top, there is some, arguments to be made that some of these could actually invoke Article 5, which obviously could very much escalate what's going on. Obviously, a lot of the criminal actors that Russia is working with are, not highly trained on, their rules of engagement and all this, and they have worked with pretty extreme groups as well. If one of their hybrid operations becomes, far more dramatic and far more escalatory than what we've seen so far against a NATO country, could that result in a serious escalation of things? And of course, are there any effective measures that we know of or that we recommend that are being taken against this? So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Davlikanova, then we'll go Julian, and then Dr. Grossfeld.
Well, there is a very interesting article written by my peer from Sagadechny Security Center, which is called A Tale for the Night, How Would I Attack Europe If I Were Putin? And it outlines a very untraditional scenario on how events may develop given that Russia excels in these sub-threshold operations. So imagine if at some point in different places in Europe, some unknown drones that were sitting there for some period of time, that were even assembled on the territory of European Union, or even with parts just printed on 3D printers, and kind of they all start attacking or threatening critical infrastructure, while there is a cyber attack on massive cyber attack on energy facilities, on banking sector, and so on and so forth. And you don't, even when you look at the Iranian operation against Iran, you see that the nature of the war has changed. And you don't really need a big number of tanks to attack and occupy the country. What Russia might most probably do is a covert operation like they did in not so much Crimea, but probably Donbass, like they are already preparing to do in Narva. And when NATO doesn't actually respond in a way that it should, which means that they just have to go out there and liberate the territory from these proxy forces, it will be a major strike on the transatlantic cooperation. It will be a huge blow to the whole European security architecture. So currently, you don't actually need to organize this full-scale invasion as we saw in 2022. Most probably, this will be just a number of these type of operations that at the end will show that many European countries are incapable of ensuring security for their population. And it is very difficult to come up with a response, because Russia is a nuclear state. And it is a very big factor, which puts a question how to respond.
Yeah, maybe to also bring in a different angle, I think in terms of learning, there's also a risk that we have already seen an escalation of the hybrid campaign throughout the last years. And I think maybe we would also sit here and talk different stories if a plane had exploded over Europe, or if a whole cinema with maybe 200 people would have been burned down during daylight in Prague. So I think this is more by coincidence that nothing more severe has happened. But I would say, depending on the threat perspective, we also see a learning. So Russia has pretty successfully demonstrated how to wage hybrid warfare in Europe. So what we are seeing, for instance, right now is that Iran very likely has also started a campaign under a mass terrorist group bombing synagogues and other Jewish places in Europe. And this really follows the Russian blueprint. Recruiting likely happens online via Telegram, via other social media platforms. And we have seen modus operandi in Ukraine. So, for instance, this recruitment of involuntarily suicide bombers against recruitment centers that by itself hasn't occurred in Europe itself, but maybe it's just a question of time when someone will deliver a bomb to maybe a pro-Ukraine demonstration. So I think there's really a risk of further escalation. There's also the risk that this paves the way and sets an example for other threat actors, states. But we have also seen that similar tactics have been adopted by other extremist and terrorist actors, trying to get a compromise and then blackmailing people or luring people into carrying out attacks. So there's a risk that this will further upscale, and then it's really a question how to respond. And I think we actually started that way. That we should really change the paradigm that Europe is already at war with Russia, and that these attacks should be also called the way they are. They are terrorism. They should be also punished accordingly. So it's not just spraying a graffiti somewhere or maybe setting fire to a building. If the perpetrators would do that in the name of the Islamic State or another terrorist organization, the reaction would be quite differently. So I would say reacting decisively and trying to curb the learning curve for other threat actors.
After my two learned predecessors, I don't have much to add except to point out that transport and communication are also at risk because, European rail, you cannot secure the thousands of kilometers that it covers, and it's very easy to blow up, including manufacturing facilities, water facilities in Scandinavian countries, the dam that was open. So the cyber component is important here, including the disinformation and undermining the trust in the governments trying to address their citizens and to show the real picture as opposed to, Russia-induced picture. So that is one. In terms of addressing it, I completely agree with Julian in that it is terrorism, pure and simple. And just as Europe and European intelligence organizations and law enforcement was addressing threats from Islamic State through anti-radicalization efforts and bigger cooperation, better cooperation between the local law enforcement and central facilities, in that recognizing that, for example, an accident is not just an accident and the graffiti is not just a graffiti, but it's connected to something bigger, is really important. And there are already ways to address, religiously directed terror attacks and terrorism activities, and it should also be taking place here. And one more thing is the implausible deniability on the Russian side, where they never, of course, take responsibility for anything like that. And when presented with evidence, they claim that it's Russophobic elements that are trying to pin those activities on innocent Russia. I wonder if there's legal enforcement or reputational loss they can endure in international organizations that are still hosting them, that can be used to point out the responsibility even further. It could be, idealistic on my part, but maybe there is a way to do something like that.
Well, thank you all so much for this panel. We're going to go to the Q&A now. So if anyone would like to type up some questions and send them in, we will be happy to answer those. We already have a couple, so we can start with the first one here. And this will go out to everyone on the panel, whoever wants to answer it. Are these hybrid warfare tactics being organized by the illicit criminal networks or by the state actors or by both together? And then a follow-up question to that is, do we consider there to be any distinction between these two types of structures or actors, i.e. the state actors and the illicit actors?
Well, as
I
I
can
said, to me, Russia and all these actors, they are all terrorists and criminals in Kremlin or anywhere else in both farms, whatever. Should we distinguish? They should all be held liable, whether in the government or not in the government, but they cooperate, of course. There is a very clear synergy, as Yelena already mentioned.
I think
Go on, sorry.
I think it depends a bit also on the location. If we speak organized criminal networks outside of Ukraine, so we have seen, for instance, in Sweden, criminal gangs cooperating with Iranian intelligence. We've seen the case in Estonia, where organized criminal networks were leveraged. These networks have nothing to do with Russia itself. They don't support them necessarily ideologically, although individuals might or might not. It's really about the money and about the capabilities that can be leveraged. So maybe individual figures, leading figures, might have connection to Russian intelligence, might also sympathize. But I would say outside Ukraine, I can fully understand that this differentiation doesn't make any sense in where already like conventional war is present. But I think again, in Sweden, in Germany, there's a differentiation between the organized criminal networks and Russian intelligence.
And I just wanted to add that although the criminal networks are executing or carrying out the tasking of Russian state and Russian intelligence, let's not forget that the driving force behind it is Russian state. If they would not be giving jobs to the criminal networks, they would be probably doing some other criminal activities, but not necessarily engaging in hybrid warfare in Europe and elsewhere.
Excellent. So then we just have actually another clarifying question off of that. This should be a quick one. Are these criminal networks acting for state power or we've kind of already answered this, but if we want to go again, are these criminal networks acting for the state power or state power that is criminalized, and is it possible to differentiate between these two? So I think we've answered that one as well. If there are any other questions, and if not, I can just preemptively give our preamble or our wrap up of what we're doing here. So, thank you all. Actually,
Robert, there is another question in the chat. What about when the war ends?
yes. Okay. Uh, thank you, Rafi. So yeah, that definitely I guess I'll pose that to you. What might this hybrid warfare landscape, particularly on the criminal side, look like after the war ends? There was a interesting Geotalk report that came out a few months ago now, that actually had reported on potential kind of collusion between Russian organized criminal groups and Ukrainian criminal groups. And obviously that could be a serious issue within Ukraine. But curious if anyone has thoughts on what that might look like once kind of open hostilities have ended in the war.
Well, in here in Ukraine, a majority believes that there is no such thing as after the war. Even if the kinetic part goes down, because we remember 2017, 18, where the war was almost invisible, but it was there. Russia's goal remains the same. It doesn't fight for a small part in Donbass, and it doesn't fight for Zaporozhye or any other piece of land. It fights to eliminate the state. So whatever is happening after peace deal, not peace deal, something signed, not signed, it doesn't matter. It will continue. All these types of sub-threshold warfare tools, it will continue using them at the scale that it will be allowed to use. And a lot will also depend on the position of the United States, how their relationship with Moscow will evolve, what's going to happen within European countries in terms of their political turmoils and so on and so forth. So Russia will go, or let's say Russia will stop where it will be stopped. And this subthreshold warfare is basically with us for as long as the polarization of the world. So when finally we reestablish a new world order, maybe then we will see the escalation. But before that, I don't think that Russia will just sit there and say, okay, now we are fine.
Yeah, I fully agree with Dr. Davlikanova. Also, beyond Ukraine, I'm not sure if there would be really a peace deal in Ukraine. I think there will be fundamental disagreements between Russia and Europe or the West. So I'm not sure if suddenly Russia will decide to curb its hybrid activities because they have proven to be quite effective, at least quite easy. And I think then again, referencing what I've said before, that I think this could also serve as a blueprint for other hybrid actors, potential networks that can be leveraged, but also recruitment mechanisms can be used, for instance, by Iran, can be used, for instance, by China, or by other potential threat actors. We've also seen more recently that the cartels, narco trafficking, have started using similar recruitment tactics in Europe, and actually also similar incidents. So it's also just a possible learning, and hybrid activities do not necessarily stop only because Russia will stop its war.
And just to add more to what Julian said, the amount of people who will walk out of this war from Russia with operational experience in using drones for military purposes, this is, you could say it's a perfect tool for continuing hybrid warfare in Europe, in using those drones, for example, not just to paralyze the work of the airport, but also in offensive ways, right? So I think we all need to be prepared.
And not only drones, all kinds of unmanned systems. I mean, it's going wild.
Well, thank you everyone so much. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Elena. This is great. For everyone in the Zoom, remember to check out the Mafiacracies portfolio on our website, thenewlinesinstitute.org. And the recording of this will actually be up in a couple of days on our YouTube channel as well. So go check that out. And thank you all for being here. And thank you all to the panelists, both the panelists previously and you three here as well. And everyone have a great day.